me. It's good to get up with you again.
Oh, I missed the intro, so we're gonna have to edit that out. I thought I clicked the
Go
button
again,
and
go again.
I
Go
thought it
again.
worked. All right. What was the line of bullshit I just threw out there? It is rolling now though. Today on the
Perfect.
show,
Yeah,
we're
go.
gonna
You
be
want
okay. We're gonna do it again. Today on the show, our first call-in Zoom show, we're going to be interviewing Michael Bruce Rosmer. This is a fella you may not have heard of, but he's living the life that you wish that you were living. The impossible lifestyle that people say just can't be done. Well, this guy's actually doing it. We're going to talk to him a little bit about how it is that he is living the life that he is living. And we're going to be talking about some of the most important topics that we can, which is at the moment in this climate, civility. How to be civil, why aren't we, and is it by design? Welcome to the Meincke Show podcast. Michael, did you know I was going to do the little singing bit? Or did I
I
just catch you
didn't
off
know
guard?
that, but that was it's like, some people pay editors to add sound effects to their videos afterwards, but you've got it all internal there. I love it.
It's all internal. I'm getting it on Fiverr and actually have that done with the little piano. I got it all written in my head. Dun 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 dun. The
Perfect.
Micah Show podcast. Doodle doo. That's how it's going to sound at some point. So,
Perfect.
Michael,
Perfect. That's good.
thanks for being on. How long has it been now that since we first met? About 4 years, 5 years, maybe a bit longer.
I think it's been more than that. Yeah, like I don't know, maybe around 6 years. Let's see. We went out yeah, maybe like around 2012, 2013, somewhere in there.
Yeah, 11, 12, somewhere in there. I think that sounds about right because of where I was at that point in life.
Yeah, yeah. I could go back and look at the photos from when we went out there with Greg into the wilderness and tried to destroy his side by sides. But anyway, it was a good
Michael,
time.
are you a newsaholic at all? Do you actually like you're a fairly busy guy? You got lots on your plate, but
I'm not a newsaholic. No, I what I see in the news, I see it. Obviously, I go onto certain websites and I'll see articles on the side, or I see things that are on Facebook. Those are my two sources. Quite a few years ago, I deliberately decided to cut that down because I thought it was a low impact activity in my life to go and read. And I know some people disagree with that. Some people like to listen to the news, read the news, and I just don't see how my life is better at the end of the day having spent the day reading the news. So
before you made that decision, like was there anything that was sort of standing out to you, where you realized, oh my God, I'm spending a lot of time on this?
well, the first thing that happened was I was using Yahoo Business for my business email, and I would go to there, and they would have these really catchy headlines, and so I'd have to click on them and read them. And then I've also had a bunch of periods where there was specific fields that I was interested in, like technology in particular. So I'd follow a lot of technology news, and actually I would still do that if I think there's a value in following news that's relevant to you. But world news is. So I find I can catch enough of it from people's Facebook posts to have a general idea what's going on, and if there's something interesting, I can dig into it. So,
It's funny
you?
how when we do watch the news, and I'm unfortunately still a newsaholic. I probably got to get that out of my routine. But you and I were talking about, and you were pro, and I was anti Bill O'Reilly. I remember that, and
Oh yeah,
because I thought, geez, this guy is such a dick. He just yells at people that disagrees with him, and I didn't like that. So that tainted how I looked at it. I was just reading. It's a form of confirmation bias. Like
yeah,
once you have decided I don't like this human being, then you just kind of write off everything that they do. And how I was
yeah,
looking at Bill O'Reilly was as this just loudmouth bully, and you saw him a different way. You thought that he was a bit more balanced and thoughtful and well thought out in his arguments and opinions. But it boiled down to the very first, to my personal experience, and then it taints everything that comes from him after that because of the confirmation bias that follows.
For sure.
Then I knew there was something I didn't like about him. Then he got kicked off of Fox for sexual whatever it was that he was doing, inappropriate behavior, which he's probably is guilty of. That
Probably. I mean,
probably.
mind you, today everything is inappropriate, so I don't know. It's hard to toe the line of being perfectly appropriate while still being human.
Well, that's it. We're also insulated, and that's why I think it's so important to travel, which you do a lot of.
I do, yep.
Because we live in this little bubble,
Yeah.
and a lot of people, they never leave their postal code, never mind traveling the world. So,
Yeah.
and they've never had to face diversity, like not real
Yeah.
diversity. I learned when I was in Croatia during the war, I was
Yeah.
able to observe that when stuff got really, really, really tough, nobody
Yeah.
complained about anything.
Yeah.
You're just happy to get 3 hours of sleep and perhaps a meal,
Yeah.
so there was no complaining. We're too tired to complain. But when things sort of settled down and all the big bunkers were built and we didn't have to fill out, then the bitching and the whining started
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it got easy.
Actually, I kind of appreciate that about the environment. Like, obviously, look, what went on in former Yugoslavia, there was nothing good about it in really any way, shape, or form, from what I can tell. It's interesting because my girlfriend's from Montenegro,
Okay.
and I spent a bunch of time in Serbia over the last year, and a little bit of time in Croatia, a little bit of time in Montenegro, etc. And so it's interesting to me, coming from Canada, and I mean, growing up, what did I hear about what was going on? I mean, a very sanitized media type view that was very Western oriented, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't really exposed to what was going on or the other side of it. And so it's been really interesting for me to be around people locally who lived through that. Like, one of my employees was, I don't remember, like 11 or 12 or something, and remembers going to the bomb shelters in 1999 when the US was bombing Belgrade for like 3 months straight. And then you can kind of think, well, talk about the confirmation bias. Is it any wonder that people don't like the US in that environment? Like, you grew up, 3,000 people were killed, probably somebody you knew or somebody that they knew. Like, we don't have that many degrees of separation. And, but you're not really exposed to the visceral reality of it when you're watching from Canada, from the US, where we have really, comparatively speaking, not much to complain about, right? I mean, you go to these places. I was in Egypt, and I mean, like you, we're probably similar. I have a real like personal development. Hey, I'm the master of my life. I'm going to learn. I'm going to shape it the way that I want. But I was looking at how some of these people lived, and I was like, you know what? Even with my mindset today, if I was born into that environment, like, I don't know what I would do. I don't know how I would get out of that situation because it's really tough. And it was funny because the first time that I ever went out with my girlfriend, actually, she made some comment. She said, you've always been rich. And I was like, no, that's not true. And she's like, no, like, you don't understand. Being poor is like, you can't afford to buy the winter jacket that you need. And it's like, yeah, okay, I've always been able to buy the winter jacket, right? And, for some people, that's rich, right? And, you're right. We complain about, it's first world problems, right?
If you can have 3 meals a day regularly and keep the rain and the snow off, keep dry when it's raining and warm when it's snowing, you're rich by most standards, by the majority
Yeah.
of the planet. That is wealthy.
Yeah.
Did you get into any
Yeah.
chat while you went through the former Yugoslavia, throughout the Balkans? Did you have a chance to chat with any of the people that were like my age and older that remembered the wars, that remembered them well?
I mean,
Or was that
some of them.
a topic that people just avoided?
Yeah, it's not a topic that I would say came up a lot. So, I think I heard about it more in the halo of it than a lot of kind of firsthand accounts, aside from, a couple people who, like I said, are directly in my social circle because they work for me or or friends of friends or something like that. So I think the most visceral one was this, not somebody your age, but a close friend of mine was in Croatia. The story was, so for anyone who doesn't know, Tito had ran Yugoslavia for like 40 years. It was communist at the time. And he died. And then shortly after that, they introduced privatization. And so this friend of mine's dad was one of the first people to sign up to have his own business. And he started to do quite well with it. And in the 80s, he was a millionaire. And something started happening, and some people started saying to him, they're like, hey, look, there's something weird going on here. This isn't right. You've got money. Why don't you take your family, go to Lake Como, get a place, and be fine? He's like, oh, no, it's going to blow over. I'm expanding my business. Well, a couple of years later, people who claimed to be his best friends held him up at gunpoint, drove him out of the country, and took everything that he had. And it was crazy because, so this guy, what was the reason for that? He was a Serbian in Croatia. And it was apparently quite hard because his wife, they weren't religious, although, there was supposedly this Orthodox Catholic divide, but neither of them were religious. But she faced a ton of pressure from family and friends to leave him. They went to Montenegro. And this friend of mine, he was, I think, they went to Montenegro first, and then they went up to Belgrade. And I think he was 13. He said it was the first time in like a couple of years that he wasn't hungry. And his dad had enough money to take his mom out for a date. And they went out, and that night, while their parents were out, some people broke into the house and held he and his brother up at gunpoint. And like,
Oh
you
my
just
God.
think about, yeah, right? Like, this is, like, it's not something that's easy to understand how that could happen,
And not just
and
the
how
average
that,
criminals, the people that kicked open the door are probably war veterans with all kinds of kills under their belt. Like very,
who
very
knows?
serious, dangerous people.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, fortunately for them, they were able to immigrate as war refugees to Australia. And, but, like you can just imagine people who you trust, people who supposedly care about you, suddenly driving you out of your country, and doing it for no reason that has anything to do with how you treated them or anything like this, but purely based on some ideological bias. And so it's pretty messed up situation.
That is messed up. And it's happening again right now. The farmers in South Africa. It's what's happening there is exactly what happened back in when Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, and the farmers were ran off at the end of a pitchfork, and it was run away and
Yeah,
leave everything that you own behind or die. Those are your choices.
yeah, yeah,
Those are your
yeah,
choices. And we don't
yeah.
when you
It's
come
crazy,
when you come back to
super
Canada,
crazy.
do you have sort of a sense of well, it depends on the circles, but do you have sort of a sense of, geez, man, everybody's sheltered and living in a bubble when you come back to Canada?
I mean, you know, yes and no. Like, obviously, that extreme that we're talking about earlier doesn't exist in this part of the world anymore. I'm in Bulgaria today. Um, and the thing that I really notice is, and it's a sort of a bizarre way of doing things. So I think that people are sheltered. And really, the way that I see it is around having their feelings hurt. Like, you know, people are upset about being offended. And I don't know, I'm not somebody who believes that you really have the right not to be offended. Like,
Yeah.
that's actually kind of something that you own. Uh, but on the flip side, what I notice is that people in Canada are a lot less judgmental, I would say. There's like a certain, especially like a very extrinsic image judgment that gets made far, far more in this part of the world than in North America. And, that shapes people's behavior. It's funny, I tell people, I've never seen more nice cars per capita anywhere in the world than in Sofia, Bulgaria, a
Really?
supposedly poor part of the world. Yeah, like literally every third car is a Mercedes, a BMW, an Audi, a Porsche, a Range Rover, whatever. Like, we were in Monaco earlier this year, and Monaco did not have as many nice cars per capita
And Monaco
as
is like
Sofia,
where all
Bulgaria.
I
Oh
have
yeah,
toured. I've driven through Monaco, and seen it from
yeah,
way up top in the cliffs, looking down at the marinas. and
Yeah,
that's where all the rich at Monaco and Cannes, which is just down the road. That's where all the
yeah,
150-foot yachts are parked.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. It's insane. And I mean, look, if you go in front of like Hotel Monte or the Monte Carlo Casino, I mean, it's a great car show, right? But you get somewhat comparable at Hotel Marinella in Sofia, Bulgaria. The first time I went there, I was going to meet a friend and client, and he went, so he had invited us there, and we come, and there is a Rolls Royce, a BMW, or sorry, a Mercedes, Bentley SUV,
Okay.
a Ferrari, uh, a bunch of Porsches and Range Rovers, and every single other car without exception was a Mercedes, a BMW, or an Audi. And we're like, is this like a dealership? Like, what's going on here? Why is this? We thought, maybe this is an anomaly. Maybe so we came back a few days later, and there was a different, Bentley, a different, this that Rolls Royce, and on and on. It's just like, what the heck? And so you see, like it's a very image-centered culture in that respect, right? There's like this show-off mentality, and people are going to judge not the substance of really what's going on in many cases, but the image of what's going to go on. And of course, that's that's a blanket generalization. It's not fair. Of course, there's a lot of people who aren't into that, but it permeates the culture in a way that it certainly doesn't. Certainly in Alberta, especially, right?
Are you familiar with Nick Halleck, the Thrillionaire? Wrote a book, The
Uh, I've
Thrillionaire.
I've heard of him. I'm not deeply aware of it.
He's in the Gregory Scott Reed circle. But
Okay, cool.
so the Thrillionaire, he's from
Yeah.
Greece, if I remember, and he refuses to own a
Okay.
car. So I mean, the guy's got dough.
Okay.
He's got lots of
Yeah.
dough, but his rationale is that if it's depreciating, it's not an asset. If it's not an asset, I don't want it. So he's just not going to buy he's not going to buy a money pit in every vehicle unless you
Yeah.
are the dealer and you flip it pretty quickly, is a money pit. And he just refuses to do it. And this is a guy, he's been on the bow of the Titanic in a submarine.
Nice.
He's been up in space.
Wow.
Been in a MiG fighter jet with the Russians. Oh shit,
Yeah.
what else has this guy done? Oh, he did a halo jump. For those that don't know what a halo jump is, it's high altitude, low opening. No, low oxygen, high altitude, low
Yep.
oxygen,
Yep.
halo. So you're jumping out of a plane with an oxygen mask on. He did this over Mount Everest. So
Wow.
so jumped over Mount Everest, which is 29,000 feet, give or take. And so he must have been flying at, I don't know, 35,000, and there ain't no air up there. So and I don't know how many people he did.
Yeah, I mean, just for reference, like most skydiving is what, like around 13,000, 12,000, somewhere in there.
Yeah, 10 to 13 in that window. And you don't want to be at 13 too long. She's getting thin and you're going to get loopy. So you got to jump out. I've only got like 24 jumps. But so he free falls a halo jump over. Like any halo jump is pretty freaking cool. But
Yeah.
dude does it over Mount frickin' Everest. So you can free fall over, and then God knows where he landed, probably at base camp of Mount Everest. Now that's doing it the right way. That beats climbing up the damn thing. That's Nick Haley,
Yep.
the Thrillionaire. But you kind of, I mean, not to equate the same extreme, but you definitely make sure that you spend money on experiences yourself. Weren't you in a biplane or something in France?
Not so we did. There's a thing that's actually in Vegas where you can go flying these planes and you can dogfight with your friends, as well as they do aerobatic maneuvers. So basically, what happens is there's like a seat at the front and then there's one in the back, and so a pilot will go with you, who's like a pro, of course, and they take off and then they take you up and they'll do a maneuver, like they'll do a barrel roll and then you do the barrel roll and so on and so forth. And depending on how much you can go through before you vomit, you might go through more or less extremes. And then they have this really cool laser system where you'll have because you and a friend will be up there or potentially multiple. And so they show you how you would dogfight with someone. And then if you get the laser can detect when you would hit them and they shoot out smoke and throw the plane into a like spin as though it was hit and is going down, and then they reset and off you go again. So it's a pretty cool experience, provided that you're not getting nauseous. I recommend definitely taking some Gravol before you go on that one.
I got one.
I did it. Go ahead.
Oh, I just got one bit. I suffer horribly from motion sickness. Always have since I was a little kid. And I finally have a cure where me and a buddy were in a small plane, is Piper Cherokee 142. And anyway, I was getting so green. We had to refuel in Golden, BC. And I was just, I couldn't get back in the plane. I was just green around the gills. I was so sick. And this hippie chick was there, and she had some ginger root with her. And she puts some slices of ginger root, puts it in a bag, says, "Here you go." Well, I was right as rain. I was ready for barrel rolls. I just put it in my lip like snuff, like just a little slice of actual ginger root, put it in my lip. Oh man, I was titanium after that. I was bulletproof. And
wow.
I went from absolutely ready to die to frick. Let's have some fun. Let's do some spins or something. I'm good. I was rock solid after that.
So that's great. I mean, I have to remember that for the next time, because I was hosting some friends, and so we went up and did it. And this one friend who was up there with me, we ended up quitting early because he was throwing up. And we landed, and he looks like Casper the Ghost. He's so pale, and he's like, "I'm not gonna lie, that was the worst experience of my life." So, I mean, they really should have warned us, because it was Vegas and we'd been out the previous night and we hadn't had enough sleep. And, there was we were really not well prepared for this process. You'd think it's like, I don't know, it costs $1,500 or something to do it. And so, if you're paying $1,500, you'd think they'd be like, okay, let's give you some advance, like, hey, prepare this way, but no, nothing. So
for a once in a lifetime deal though, that ain't bad. I mean,
no, it's not.
$1,500. It's for most people that it takes a while to save that up, but it's a lifetime memory. You got that forever.
Yeah, exactly. And I like to try and do a few of those every year, right? You try and nail some of these bucket list memorable, unique, memorable experiences.
So how do you do it? How do you travel the world, do cool stuff, and be able to afford it?
I mean, that's a great question. Somebody asked me that like a couple days ago, a friend who's quite successful in his field, but feels, and so, the thing that I told him is, I could give you what I do, but it doesn't mean that you can do it.
Right.
So, I've made an effort for a lot of years, since about 2006, I guess, to really build location independent income streams, right? And so, I have a variety of different businesses that I do. But I think the more useful thing for somebody who's listening is to recognize that, first of all, you really need to identify an opportunity. And the way that you find opportunities, the funny thing that happens for people in life is, when they're getting started, they're like, where's the opportunities? I need to find an opportunity. And then once you get into it, you can probably relate to this. There's too many opportunities. You're like, what are you talking about, man? They're everywhere. But it really comes, I find, from two things. One is building expertise, which really means just learn everything, because you don't know what's going to pay off at first, et cetera. So follow your curiosity and do that. Number two is building relationships. There are so many times, I'm doing some art deals right now where we're hopefully going to broker the sale of some really rare and expensive paintings. And how did that come about? Because I had been introduced to somebody about a year and a half ago or something, who knew one of the businesses that I'm in, which is international structuring. And so he ended up meeting somebody who was in the art business and said, oh, hey, maybe some of your clients would be interested in this. And it happens that a couple of people in my network have a background in the art business. I know nothing about the art business, but I could reach out to them and say, hey, I know one person has a 17-year background in the industry, and somebody else has, a lot of another very detailed background, and know a lot of people. And so it's like, okay, maybe there's something we can put together here. So the thing is, I didn't meet any of those people thinking like, oh, hey, we're going to do some art deals. No, you just go and you build relationships with people, and you try and build expertise, and you try and solve problems. And I think the attitude of every time there's a problem, there's an opportunity. Like somebody talked to me a few days ago and they said, oh, apparently there's a problem right now for trucking companies from Quebec expanding to Ontario, not being able to get insurance for these big freight trucks. And for whatever reason that's a problem, first of all, whether it is a problem or not, you can dive into that. But it's like, okay, well, if there's a problem, then if you can solve that problem, that's an opportunity. So that gives you something to go learn. And if you learn to solve problems, then, there's probably other people out there who have the same problem, and you can go and you can build something around that. And very often the solution to a problem is a relationship, right? It's, I've met somebody else who happens to have an expertise in a given field. And then in the process of looking for solutions to a problem, that's a great way to meet other people, right? You start calling somebody and you say, hey, look, I have this problem, do you know how to solve it? Do you have resources, whatever? And whether something comes of that or not, now you have a relationship. And so the next time something comes around, you have more resources available to you. So, I just think that you could go through, okay, you want to work for yourself rather than for somebody else most of the time. That was kind of like my first decision. My first decision, if I was to go back story-wise, was I'd gone on a family trip in 2005 we'd gone for 2 months to Europe, or I was 2 months for Europe. My family wasn't there for the whole time. And I was the first time I'd gone on a vacation in a few years. I'd been kind of fixed on working my job. And when I was off, I would go and stay with my grandmother and help her out and do some writing, and was learning card magic. And I was just like, wow, I really love this travel thing. I'd like to travel more. And I wrote down this list of all these trips. And I just did the math. It was like 30 trips. I went on one, the list grew by 5. And I'm like, look, I'll never have enough money or time off working a normal job to be able to afford to do this regularly. And I'm going to be 80 trying to check off these bucket list things, and I'll have lost my youth. So I don't want that. So what's the solution? Well, the only solution is to do something for myself. I didn't really think at the time about location independence and automating income and things like that. But just like, who can do that? Business people can do that. So you got to start a business. And my attitude was, well, I could fail at this, but nobody could take away from me what I learned. So I'm going to focus really hard on learning and developing expertise. And, then there's going to be a million lessons as you go along. And I don't think it's that useful to try and dump 10 years of lessons on somebody when they're just getting started. But I would say, like, look for opportunities. And then, it's like, take ownership of your life, I guess, is probably the biggest thing, right? I heard somebody say once that some people say they're prisoners to their business. And they're like, well, that's really stupid because it's your business. You get to decide how you make your business. And so if it's not serving you, then change it so that it is serving you. And for me, the people I most respect in the world, I think it's like a victim mentality of life happens to me, or I make life happen. And when I look at, to me, the greatest people in history are people who, they didn't let the world exert its will on them. They decided to exert their will on the world. They said, this is the way that I want it to be, and I'm going to find a way to make it happen. And sometimes you succeed, sometimes you fail, but there's that underlying attitude. And I don't know, I just ranted a bunch of different things there, but
It's
hopefully
a good rant, though.
Something useful.
It's a good rant. It's funny, Greg, our mutual friend, poor guy isn't here to defend himself right now. But even though he knows you, even though he knows you well, he says you're impossible. So he's looking right at you, and it still says you're a yeti, you're a unicorn. As he's looking at you, it's like, no, that can't be done. I can't have a business without being there. It's impossible. I have to be there. And and yet you're doing it.
Yeah, I think that the first step of that is, you might be there but not be physically there, right? So one of the things that we do in one of my companies is we help people hire remote workers. So look, you can hire people who are very educated, amazing people. In particular, we hire them from Serbia, and they have an amazing education system there. Like, these are hardworking, intelligent, very educated people, and it's far less expensive than it would be to hire somebody in North America or Western Europe or something like that. And a lot of what it is that you need done can be done remotely. So first of all, you're saving yourself money. Second of all, I think it's great because you're giving somebody who, look, people in Serbia struggle to get jobs that pay 400 euros a month. So you're giving work to somebody who, that's beneficial. And on top of that, like, they can probably do this task from anywhere. So I have an assistant who's just a travel assistant. All she does for me is looks for travel deals, finds hacks, because I know that if I start looking at hotels and flights, I'm going to spend hours and hours, and it's not a great use of my time. And I can have somebody else who can go through looking for flight deals for me. So I'll say, okay, Teodora, I'm going to Asia in start of December. Look for business class tickets for us from here to one of these cities. I'm flexible, so let's see what we can find for deals. And does she need to be in the same office as me? No, she doesn't need to be in the same office. It's all happening on the internet. It's fine.
Do you ever go first class just cause?
I've never. I've flown first class once, and the thing about first class, business class, economy class, etc., is it does vary a lot by airline and route. So it's different on a narrow body plane versus a wide body plane, etc. So it's on my list of things to do like the Emirates or Etihad or Singapore Airlines private suites. They've got those ones that
have you flown
in, and you've got.
Have you flown the Emirates before?
I have, yeah.
Yeah,
Emirates
that's
is great.
Far and away the best airline I've ever been on.
Yeah. There's like these Middle Eastern countries have really great service cultures. Like we're going to fly Qatar. We're going to Asia in a couple of weeks, and so we'll fly Qatar there. But Qatar, Etihad, Emirates, and then the other one. I haven't tried, but people have told me Oman is good. Apparently, there's Saudi now, so we saw some really good deals from Italy on Saudi Airlines, and then Singapore Airlines is the other one. That's, they do an amazing job. You'll see their suites that they've got the 17-course meal that's custom made for you and all this kind of thing. I think it's tough to justify the price jump from business class to first class. It's like, okay, pretty extravagant, but at some point in time, it's on my list of things to do for sure.
Is there a particular criteria of what you're looking for a travel location? There's a series, I think it's called Dark Tourist on Netflix.
Yeah, a friend just put me onto this one. I was just in Lisbon, and while we were there, he showed it to me, and I was like, "Oh, this is amazing! Like, this guy goes to such cool places." For me, I mean, I usually like to try and go to new places. So as much as there's places that I love, I tend not to try and go back to the same places again because I'd like to expand my sphere. So, for example, earlier this year, we could have gone to a few different places, but we went to Netherlands, we went to Portugal. Why? Because we'd never been to Netherlands and Portugal. So, that's cool stuff. So usually that, and then there's something, I usually pick my destination based on something specific. So, for example, back in the day, my brothers and I usually do an annual trip together. And so we went to Mexico one year to swim with the dolphins. Now, of course, we're going to do a whole bunch of other things, but, there's that. We went to Thailand to play with and pet the tigers. We went to Hawaii last winter to go walk by the volcanoes and the flowing lava and things like that.
Pretty typical tourist spots, though.
In those cases, yeah. But for example, I went to Georgia earlier this year, and who's been to Georgia? That's
like Georgia, Soviet Republic, Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. Not Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S. Yeah, no. So, very few people have been there, and it's a really interesting place to be. It's not like a typical tourist spot, and look, some of the typical tourist spots are typical tourist spots for a reason. Like, they're good, right? It's great if you can find hidden gems, but a lot of the places, especially since I think one of the things that inspires me is I'll see on Instagram, like if you were to open up my phone and scroll through the discovery feed, it's pretty much all travel and cool things like this. So I'll see a cool location and be like, okay, we're going to go there. So I save these collections by countries that I know, okay, I'm going to Cambodia. Let's open up the collection for that and see the things that I want to see. And so, yeah.
Have you had any close calls in all the travel? Have you ever been like, oh shit, I'm in trouble now?
I don't know that I've genuinely I've had a couple experiences that were scary. I felt scared, but whether I had reason to feel scared is another thing. And I mean, the most recent one that I can think of was we went to Alexandria, Egypt for Christmas last year.
Oh, that's some
Or was that a
historic
mistake?
shit.
Oh, we were in Dubai just before then, and we flew from Dubai to Alexandria. We were landing at like 3 in the morning. And I expected when we arrived there that the airport wouldn't be that nice, which it's not, which that's fine. And like I said, my girlfriend's from Montenegro. Well, they didn't know that Montenegro was a country to start off with, so they're passing her passport around. They're like, Montenegro, have you heard of Montenegro? I haven't heard of Montenegro. I mean, it must be real. It looks real. She's with a Canadian. It's like, um, anyway, so that was fine. We got through that. And we go, okay, welcome to Egypt. And so I figured, you know what? Like, I don't really know what it's going to be like when we step onto the streets. You could get scammed, you get all this stuff. So I should hire a car to take us to the hotel while we're in the airport. So we go there, and the guy's sleeping. So it's like, okay, great. We wake him up and hire this car, and we walk out there. And sure enough, there's all these people heckling you to try and carry your luggage and do whatever else. We get into this car. And at this point in time, it's like about 4 in the morning. I don't speak the language. I have no cell or internet coverage. I don't know anything about this. And we start driving. And I'm expecting like to be driving on a paved highway. No, no, no. We're driving on like this like dirt road thing where we have to like stop and go around these massive potholes. And then we're driving, and we start coming. And so we're staying we booked at the Four Seasons. And so we see the Radisson Blu, and we see some of these nice or like resort type hotels. I'm thinking, okay, we should be by there. No, we keep driving past these things. What the heck's going on here? And then we drive into like what can only be described as like an industrial. It seems like a shut down oil refinery. That's what it seems like. And I'm thinking like,
Uh-oh.
we may lose our kidneys tonight. This is not good. I'm making plans in my head for like, if I see this guy start talking on his phone or pull over somewhere, I'm gonna like jump him and tell my girlfriend to run or whatever. Like, and we drive through there, and then we seem to drive through the city. We've been going for like 45 minutes. It's ridiculous. And we're go through the middle of nowhere. We go into like this almost like trailer park type area, like these broken down homes and stuff. And I'm like, this is a little bit concerning. Like, what's happening here? And so anyway, I'm like, hey, like, how far are we? What's going on? He can't understand me. But at some point he says, about 15 more minutes. All right. And so fortunately, we pulled up, we did get to the hotel, but then this was a culture shock. We arrive and you don't get to drive into the compound of the hotel. They have people, they pop the trunk, they come out, they do mirrors underneath the car. They take dogs to sniff for bombs. They scan the driver's license of the driver. Then they let you drive in. Then they take all of your luggage. They put it through x-ray machines. You go through metal detectors, and then you go into the hotel. And I'm like, this is not reassuring.
Holy crap. That's better security than the Pentagon.
Oh, it was insane. And then I go down the next morning to talk to the concierge, and I'm like, so how dangerous is it here? He's like, oh, it's not dangerous. I'm like, really? Because I'm from Canada, and we don't have all this security. It's kind of safe, So yeah, that was a bit of a scary experience. And I mean, I was pretty on edge for a bunch of the time in Egypt. And I mean, like, look, the day we left Cairo, there was like a shooting with 52 people were killed and things like this, right? So it was not
on that day.
Not on that day, yeah. So it's yeah. So that was like probably one of the more like concerning moments of travel. There's little things where you're, on edge or whatever, but that was the one where you're very powerless in that situation, right? Like if somebody wanted to take advantage of you, what are you going to do about it? Like I said, you're in a foreign country, you have no mode of communication, you're at their whim in terms of where you're going to be located. Like,
have you ever been to Colombia?
I've not been to Colombia yet. No,
it's on the list. Still, if that's still the top of the list of the places most likely to be kidnapped and held for ransom.
I don't know.
It was at the top of the list for a while.
Really? Well, I know when I would live part of the year in Costa Rica for a few years, and it was fairly common to have kidnappings for ransom there. You'd hear about it like
in Costa Rica
every now and then. Yeah, in Costa Rica. Yeah. So, and I mean, not as bad as, I don't know, Nicaragua or something like that. So I can only imagine. I really want to go to Brazil. It's on my list, but I've heard there's a lot of crime there, and it's quite unpleasant from that perspective. So I
Yeah,
want to go with either some locals or something like that.
yeah, you got to know where you're going, and definitely have some people that know their way around and where not to go, especially in Brazil.
Yeah,
It's daunting.
yeah, exactly. And I've been told that, when we were in Portugal, there's a lot of people from Brazil there because Portuguese, obviously. And a lot of those people would say, it really depends where you go. Like, I think it's southern Brazil, they said is very European. And so, that's great. So, yeah, I wouldn't know that, though, as a foreigner. I just know that Rio looks gorgeous when I see pictures of it. And, obviously there's Iguazu Falls is near there, and you've got the Amazon and things like this. So, I mean, it seems like one of the most aesthetic or like picturesque places in the world. So
Are
I'd
there
love to go and check it out.
any crazy trips that are on your list, like canoeing down the Amazon River for 1,000 miles, anything like that?
I mean, that's that one in particular would be something. No, let's see here. What would be? There's a thing that I had thought at one point I'd wanted to do that I don't know that I will do anymore, just because at the time I don't know what I was thinking, but I thought I wanted to go pony. I was interested in the Mongols, and I wanted to go pony riding across Mongolia to experience what it was like to be these Mongols. I think I'd get bored after not too long, but who knows? So there's that. I mean, it's more like I have a list of things to do. Like I'd like to go base jumping at some point. That's kind of ridiculous.
Have you done
And
in
hang
skydiving?
gliding, and yeah, I've been skydiving. I don't know, 4 times now, I think. So I've
Okay.
done a little bit of it. I'd like to do a lot more. I'd like to actually. So I've done hot air ballooning twice in the last just over a year because I went for my birthday last year and then again for my birthday this year. But we went to Cappadocia this year because have you seen Cappadocia?
No, I don't even know where that is or what that is.
It's in Turkey.
Okay.
Turkey's awesome, by the way. Like, it's a great place to go right now. It's super cheap. It's like the Turkish people are possibly the most welcoming people I've ever seen anywhere in the world. There's some scammers too, but it's really, really very appealing. Lots to see, super diverse country. But Cappadocia, they launched it's kind of like you would know the hoodoos in Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
So the landscape is a little bit like that. They have these things they call chimneys, and they launch 150 balloons every morning over this.
Every
And
morning.
so you can just look every morning, yeah. And so you can see, like, you wake up, and if you're up early enough, I remember we stayed in this cave hotel, so it's like a hotel that's built into the side of one of these embankment ferry things, and I kind of like looked out the window and I see like some hot air balloons, and I like woke up my girlfriend, and then I ran upstairs, and you look out and you just see all these hot air balloons. And so going hot air ballooning anywhere else, I went in Zagreb in Croatia last year, and it's a cool experience. You get this beautiful view, etc. I'd recommend it. But doing it when you're amid 150 of them all launching at the same time is a magical experience in a way that, I don't know where else you find that, right? It's pretty extraordinary.
That is pretty extraordinary. The
Yeah.
have you been to any really other than Alexandria? Any like remote places, or do you have any interest to go to some? Like, what's the most bizarre location that you have an interest of checking out?
I mean, that's a good question. Like, I'd really like to go to Patagonia in Chile.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that has been very interesting to me. I'd like to go check out the Amazon. There's a bunch of areas there. Actually, there's some areas in Ecuador. There's a bunch of areas that I'll see pictures of in South America that look pretty cool. Let's see here. What else would
Are
be
you
some
going to
like
try to make
remote?
contact with some indigenous tribe?
I don't know. I don't know really. I haven't researched it that much. I just see, again, like I'm often inspired by some beautiful photo or some crazy story. Like I like that Dark Tourist show just for some of the
Yeah.
things I'll see. I'm like, man, this is pretty cool. Like actually, some of the areas after watching that show that I want to go check out is like this Turkmenistan place.
Oh
Like I
yeah.
saw the episode where he goes there, and I'd read recently about guy who called himself like Turkmen Basha, this megalomaniac dictator who was there, who would do just all kinds of ridiculous things, right? Like banned dentistry or fake teeth or something, and
Yeah,
told his
they
people if
had
they
that
have
martial
problems, they
arts.
should chew on both like dogs.
They had that martial arts competition where
Yeah,
nobody showed
yeah,
up, and they spent more money than you do on the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, exactly. And they had like that city that looks palatial, right? It's this like palatial empty city. And so some of these places that I also saw, I follow this guy Nas Daily on Facebook. He does like these 1 minute videos. They're pretty cool often. And he just did one on Armenia. And I had zero interest in going to Armenia. And then he starts talking about this and giving some stuff about it. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. So a bunch of these places I'd like to go. I mean, I'd like to go to Saudi Arabia. I've, it's apparently a really hard place to go to, but there's a bunch of stuff I'd like to see there. Uh, I mean, probably like I think I've been to 41 countries at this point in time or something, and I'd like to go to probably a good half of the countries on the planet because you see something. And I'd like to go to Antarctica. That's pretty remote.
How
That would
many
be
how many countries are there on the planet? Like 160 is in my head.
196, I think.
196. That's a lot of
Yeah,
countries. Are
yeah.
you
It
are you,
also depends how you count because some things don't count as a country. Like a bunch of the stuff in the Caribbean are like British overseas territories and things, so you don't get to count them. But it's not really a very good measure, I find. I keep a list of all the countries I've been to divided by continent and stuff. It's not that thorough because, as an example, the U.S. you could go to one city and be like, "Oh, I've been to the U.S." But you know, when I have friends who have never been there and they try to generalize what the U.S. is like, and I'm like, you have to understand the U.S. is practically as diverse as Europe. Like, it's a really big
easily?
place with a lot of variation. So, you know, if you've been, I think I've been to 30 states or something like that.
I mean, Canada
And,
has some
I'd like,
diversity, especially if you look at the Acadian, the Acadian portion of New Brunswick, or I was just in Montreal a couple weeks ago, and I mean
nice.
that's different. It feels like you're in a different country almost, but it's not
Yeah.
diverse like the States.
No.
All the different accents, and I mean, our the Canadian coast to coast, the Canadian accent does vary a little bit, and of course, when you get to the East Coast, it varies significantly. But
Yeah.
it's nothing like the States, though. And how everybody calls you sir in Texas to Boston. I can't even do the Boston accent. I can't even try it. But, and there's a
Yeah. And then you get,
difference
go
in
to New
attitudes
Orleans
as
and
well.
places like that. Oh, yeah. Like, you go into Texas and you've entered Texas. It's, which is cool, right? Like, that's part of the thing that I like about it is experiencing something different than what you're used to, because otherwise you might as well stay at home.
Yeah, no, the States has a lot of flavor. I really enjoy going down to the States. And there's so much more to see. And then in Canada, it's more ridiculous wilderness, um, but you only tend to see it from the highways and the tourist traps. Unless you get into a little plane or something like that, you don't really have an appreciation for how gargantuan our country is. Like, it is
Yeah.
so honking big, and we have so much ridiculous amounts of wilderness that are completely untouched by a human hand. Like,
Yeah.
like northern Alberta is insane. It's just tracks and tracks, and when you're flying over it, I look down and go, God, I hope the plane doesn't crash, because there is nothing anywhere.
Yeah.
We're like 100 kilometers from some tiny little town,
Yeah.
at any point. But
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
we've got. Have you done anything in the high north? What's the furthest north you've been, or do you have any interest in that?
High level is the farthest north. I mean, a little bit north of high level is the farthest north that I've been in Canada. I'd really like to go up to Alaska. That's someplace that I haven't been yet,
Mm-hmm.
and so we'll see. I'll get there, but yeah, that's the farthest north that I've gone so far. And honestly, I'm in a little bit of a kick right now where I'm not very big on the winter. So
Yeah.
it's like I feel it starts to get cold. I'm like, all right, we're going to Asia. It's going to be warm there. We'll go to Latin America, something like that, where I don't have to freeze. I do really want to go up to actually a really big one that I want to do is the northern Norway. You see
Okay.
those crazy cliffs and things. I don't know if you've like taken a look at this, but it looks spectacular. And then you've got the northern lights, of course. We get
I was
them
just
in.
going to say the Northern Lights, when you go up way north, are way different than like Edmonton, and way more
Yeah,
frequent
yeah,
as well.
yeah. And even in Edmonton, they're cool, right? Like you get something that's great, but I mean, you go to the next level. So yeah, I'd really like to like. Have you seen those? They have it's like a glass igloo that you can sleep under the northern lights in.
Where is that? Where do they do that?
I think it's in Finland, to be honest with you, but
Yeah, I
I'm
think
not.
that's right.
Yeah, I've just.
They have an ice hotel in Quebec somewhere too.
Yeah, I'd really like to go to the ice hotel thing. I think they also have one in Switzerland, I think. So it's
Didn't expect to see that on camera.
just hang on just a second, Mark. Just yeah. Remind me to tell you something about Central Heat. Okay. Something. Sorry about that.
Well, at least you had a towel on.
There you go. There you go.
Surprise.
Anyway, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many places to go. Like, honestly, I feel a bit of a sense of urgency sometimes to go and see these places. Like my mom made some comment to me the other day because I forget where we were thinking about going, but here's a thing that we're very blessed that I hadn't appreciated until I was over in this part of the world is the Canadian passport is a wonderful thing. And so Tiana travels with me all the time now. And so we have to get visas for a bunch of places that I wouldn't normally need to get. And, it creates a little bit of extra hassle. And my mom was kind of like, well, maybe you have to wait till she has a Canadian passport or something. And I was like, no, like, not going to put off living. That's horrible. So, just have to keep checking these places out because you don't know how much time you'll have. So.
No, that's exactly true. It's the same driver when I wrote my first book, Why Not Me? I don't know if you ever read it or if I gave you a copy, but I had this weird sense of doom where it's like, man, I got to get this done just in case I don't live long enough to do it.
Yeah.
It was a strong driver. There's just curious if you have what your thoughts are. I have sort of this dream trip in my head. Wonder if it'd be interesting to you. Maybe we'll do it together. But sure. It's sort of the Walter Mitty tour I want to do.
Okay.
So start in Newfoundland because I have not even set foot on the province, and it would take a few weeks to do a fair, decent tour of it. But from Newfoundland to Greenland, because who the hell's ever been to Greenland?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And I don't know how much time a person needs to spend there, but I definitely want to check out some of the towns and then actually stand on that ridiculous glacier, maybe do a helicopter tour a little bit, because all you see is endless ice that's there all year round. That's bizarre. Got to see it.
Yeah, for sure.
From Greenland to Iceland, because I don't think there's anything in between. If there is something in between, I will want to check it out, but I don't think there is. So Greenland to Iceland to the Frozen Islands, because again, who the hell's been to the Frozen Island? And and then after that, it doesn't really matter. I want to see the Isle of Man. Have you ever been to the Isle of Man?
I haven't. I haven't been to the Isle of Man or the Channel Islands. So I do business with some people in both, and but they would have come and meet me in London as opposed to my going out there. So at some point that would be a place. I don't actually think there's too much to see, but go and check them out anyway.
Go check them out. Short trip. Just to do it. There's something I wanted to ask you today. Is in all the travel, have you found sort of a common denominator among cultures and among people? Because some people say, "Oh, there's such diversity," but is there? Aren't we all kind of basically like Maslow's hierarchy of needs? We've all got the basic same needs.
Yeah. I think that I find that people have a lot more in common than they do in different, personally. And there's actually a really fantastic book, which this ties into. We were going to talk about civility and some of this. There's a book called Factfulness. I don't know if you've read it. It's written by a Swedish doctor.
Yeah, but I will.
Yeah, it's great. It was on Bill Gates's top books of the year list. And so he's this Swedish doctor who lived and worked a lot in Africa and some of these parts of the world. And he teaches this thing about factfulness because he said he would educate on global health and a lot of population things like demographic issues, etc. And he said people consistently misunderstood how the world was. And so we thought at first, okay, it's because people are uneducated. And he would do this little test, it's like 10 questions or something. And from Nobel Prize winners to people in villages to very successful business people to random people working at the local supermarket, people consistently score worse than chimpanzees on this test. And, this is shocking. So he would go and educate. But then he said what would happen is people would love his talk. And then afterwards, he would overhear them talking about things that he had thoroughly debunked in his talk. And he's like, what are you doing? What's going on here? And what he came to believe is that there is a systemic problem with how we think about the world. And so he goes through these ways of seeing the world more accurately. And so a good example is we were talking earlier about rich and poor. And he talks about how there's this, it's what he calls the myth of the gap, which is that there's an us and there's a them and there's this gulf between us. He's like, it's just not true. It's not accurate. And he goes through all different statistics around what he'll teach his students, et cetera, on the subject. Like he said, he'll be talking about some third world country and people will say, oh, but they can't be like us. And he's like, well, hang on, who do you mean by us? They're like, oh, the Western countries. He's like, okay, so not Japan. And Japan can't be like us. They're like, well, no, Japan's different. It's like, okay, so Singapore, they can't be like us. Well, no, they're different too. He's like, okay, well, I don't understand. What are you talking about then? Who is them and who is us? And, he'll go through these statistics and, show people be like, it's exactly how they think. And he's like, yeah, but those were 1960 statistics. If you pull out the 2000 statistics, it's very different. And so he talks about, as an example, changing the way you look at these things to looking at levels. And so he gives the example, we were talking about rich and poor, et cetera. And he says, there's level one, which is less than $1 a day. And the problem for us, why we sometimes don't see progress in, say, global poverty, is going from $1 to $2 a day, or $1 to $4 a day, seems to us like, hey, they're still poor. He's like, but I promise you, the difference for those people is huge. It's a massive difference for them. And the difference from $4 to $16 is a massive difference. And the difference from $16 to $64 is a massive difference. And so there's these levels, and that's the way that the world works. It's a more accurate way to look at the world in terms of these levels than, an us, them, a binary worldview. And so he goes through 7 or 10 or something, different factfulness habits, practices to see the world more accurately. And one of the things that he does is he goes across cultures and he'll show photos of like, hey, look, if you're at level 1, doesn't matter where you are in the world, life looks pretty similar. Here's what a toothbrush looks like. Here's what, shoes look like. Here's what, a toilet looks like. Here's, and it's pretty similar. And then, level 2, it's pretty similar. And so, yeah, another example would be giving birth, right? Numbers of children. People will say, oh, it's a religious problem. He's like, actually, that's not borne out by statistics. It's a developmental problem. If people are in poverty, they tend to have a lot of kids. As a society develops and people have, industrialization and development and wealth, et cetera, they tend to have less kids.
When the child mortality rate is through the roof, you have to have more than 2, or you have none. Like you have to have
exactly
5, 6 kids, hoping that 2 or 3 survive.
Yeah, and likewise, you could flip it around. You could look at an agricultural environment versus an urban environment, right? If you're in an agricultural environment, then basically the economic incentive is kids are free labor. In an urban environment, kids are extra mouths to feed. So, you've got this different, you might say that's cold or cruel or something, but, at when you macro it out, these things affect people's decisions and kind of drive their behaviors. So, yeah, I think that obviously there's differences. I think people carry with them different backgrounds for sure. That's and the backgrounds affect their values, right? So if you were raised in a certain environment where you're used to seeing things a certain way, it's one of the things that I find most interesting is when people, they have certain views about the world, and those views might be accurate about their world. And I don't think it's very effective to try and argue with them otherwise, but I think what's really effective is when they spend some time in a different environment and they just see like, oh, wow, what I believed, it's not that it's not true, it is true, but it's only true in that context. And there's a different context, which has a different set of truths, of different, things are different.
Do you think there's any cultures that shouldn't mix?
That's a great question.
Because we have this idea in North America of the melting pot and
Hmm.
multiculturalism, that the door is open to absolutely everybody. But should it be?
Hmm.
Because have you found that there's some people that just will not blend with Western culture? Like, it's just not a fit. It's just a bad marriage.
You
They
know,
should just say no.
I'm super curious about that question. I think that well, okay, some background. I was thinking about a while back, I saw Warren Buffett. He's been very bullish historically on the U.S., right? He'll say, for 270 years or whatever, it's been a mistake to bet against the U.S., and it still is today. And so when I heard him say that, I was like, you know what? I wonder if that's just an outdated opinion. Like, okay, sure, it's non-disputable that the U.S. grew faster than other countries to become, a dominant world power. But is that true today? Are they still, or are other countries growing faster? And I looked up GDP growth rates from the last 10 years, 20 years down to, back to, I think, 1990. And actually, the US is highly competitive in their growth rates. There's very few countries whose GDP growth has surpassed that of the US. There's China, of course, there's India, there's Ireland, Singapore, but most of them not by much. And China is the one big exception. And so and likewise, I was looking the other day, I just saw it was like a chart and it showed the top 20 countries ranked by GDP, and it was a month by month change since 1960. So it would show as a percentage of the global GDP what was changing. And you get to see, as Japan accelerated and then Japan kind of stalled out and fell back, and the rise of Germany, and Germany kind of. And the interesting thing is the US was pretty much the only country that almost never had a year where the GDP declined. It was pretty steady growth, whereas a lot of the others might accelerate faster, but then they'd fall back. And it just makes me ask, like, okay, there's something that they do right. Like, I can point out a lot of dysfunctions in the US system. There's a ton of problems, no doubt about it. And yet, in spite of this, they seem to have something that works. There's something in that alchemy. And I got thinking about it, and I was like, what is it that works in the US system? And I think that one of the things that it might be is the diversity. Because when I compare to a lot of other parts of the world, there's not really any other places that are as diverse. You can go to Dubai and you can say, okay, I mean, when we stayed in the Shangri-La the last time I was there, and there's like 92 different ethnicities or backgrounds or whatever, just working in that one hotel. So it's for sure the most globally diverse city I've ever been to.
I'm sorry,
That being
which
said,
city? Dubai?
this is Dubai.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But this is not, but it's not really culturally diverse the same way. Like, okay, it is by Middle Eastern standards, but the truth is it still has this governing set of rules and restrictions. It's not really free to have different cultures be the way they want to be, right? And you could look at something similar like Singapore, or you could look at places that are great like Japan. I mean, I love Japan. Japan's an extraordinary country, but it's extremely homogeneous. And so it's just like, okay, is it that the problem with having a culture is the culture might be amazing in this environment in this time. But what happens when the environment changes? What happens when we hit some sort of, the word just system that we're in a different environment, different economically, different demographically, different whatever, does that then it's almost like that culture is a strategy, and that strategy exhausts itself, and you need to learn to do something different. And by being diverse, it kind of can slow you down a little bit in the short term, but it gives you a lot of different avenues to pursue if those cultures are allowed to express themselves, that they can rise up for when they're most beneficial for society, and then when we kind of get through that phase, they're going to go down, something else is going to rise up. I don't know if that's the case or not, and I understand the feelings of, hey, look, it's a little bit scary to have people of a different culture than you voting in laws that seem to change the world that you grew up in. And it doesn't really feel good. It's like, hey, this is my country. I want to keep my country the way that it is. These people are going to come here. They should amalgamate. And, there's certainly some countries that do that. That being said, I don't know. I think there's a value of diversity. It's the same thing with freedom of speech. Like, I was watching a talk by Jordan Peterson yesterday,
I love
and
that
he
guy.
was talking about, yeah, he's got some great stuff. Absolutely. And he was talking about hate speech, and he's like, look, obviously, hate speech isn't good. Obviously, it happens. Obviously, we don't want it. But that being said, I don't think that it should be illegal. I don't think the way to deal with it is to make it illegal. And the reason is, well, who defines hate? And the answer over time is that the person who you don't want to define hate is going to end up defining hate.
Yeah.
And that becomes very dangerous in the ripple effect. And I think it's probably I see it a lot on social media, is people have forgotten or lost the value of freedom of speech as like a fundamental virtue. Like, they want to shut down dissenting opinions. You
Well,
see,
that's
it's
the
like, oh, I
that's the
agree with
bubble
you, so I'm
people
going to block
again.
you.
That's the bubble, because they're in
Yep.
the bubble, and
Yep.
they cannot possibly imagine the Armageddon that that has happened time and time and time and time and time again, where a free nation turns into a totalitarian nation. They don't understand it. They're scared of it,
Mhm.
but they don't know what it looks like. And they have
Mhm.
no idea. And it's like
Yeah.
everybody's pointing fingers and screaming Hitler about Trump right now, when he's the exact opposite of a totalitarian. And I mean, I can see where some of the
Mhm.
personality traits would have people concerned, because he's well, he's Trump. Um, you know, so I could see where people would emotionally go there, but there's no
Yep.
logic and no actual evidence that he's the opposite. He's the exact opposite of a totalitarian.
Mhm.
And he's not an extremist, he's a moderate. But because he's kind of a yucky
Mhm.
human being, the confirmation bias kicks in, because he is yucky. He's icky in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
But he's the opposite of the next Hitler. That's just not a concern. There's not going to be any concentration camps. Uh, Chill the hell out, everybody.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, there's some things about him that I would say are, probably a little bit extreme. And whether those things are going to be positive for the U.S. long term or not, I mean, it remains to be seen. I was quite humbled by the fact that he got elected at all, because I was so sure Hillary was going to win. Like,
I was
I
pretty
bet a
sure she was too.
friend and I lost. Oh yeah, I remember, like, I had a number of conversations where people were concerned about Trump, and I'm like, I'm not concerned about Trump at all, because there's no way he's going to win. Hillary's going to get in. She's got it in the bag. The stats back it up. You know, a friend of mine, we were having breakfast, and I was like, I told him this, and he's like, oh really? Like, I don't think so. I think Trump's going to win. And I was like, okay, how much do you want to bet? And he's like, or I think he said, he was like, oh, I bet you or something. And I'm like, okay, how much? And he's like, I don't know. How much do you think? I was like, whatever you want. $1,000, $10,000. I'm taking your
You thought it
money.
was a
This is
lot.
great. Oh yeah, yeah. And so he's like, whoa, that's a little high. Let's do $100. I'm like, all right, $100. And what did I know? I mean, he destroyed Hillary in the actual election, right? So, I mean, I don't know. And so, when people will say, hey, trade war is horrible, or this is bad, it's like, well, I wasn't smart enough to know that he was going to get elected at all. So what do I know about whether, this, that, or the other thing is going to work out? I mean, I hope that the stuff that he's doing has a benefit, and I understand a certain perspective of why somebody might believe that it will, whether it does or not. I mean, my crystal ball is broken, so so we're gonna.
Are you scared of him?
No, I'm not scared of him, not at all.
You don't think he's going to
I,
be the next apocalyptic figure?
no, and I like, people make a really big deal about how bad he is, and I'm like, in terms of what he actually does, not what the media like portrays of what he does. Like, I mean, the Muslim ban thing was probably a good example, right? It's like, well, he was portrayed as a Muslim ban. It was actually, like hand screening on people coming from 6 different countries, right? And
Which has always been
so,
there. That's never
okay,
not been there.
yeah. So, I mean, okay, there was like and so that's like, the media hates Trump, and I mean, I guess I can understand why, because actually, on the one hand, they shouldn't, because he gives them more news coverage than anything else. I mean, they're selling a lot of advertising with him. But I mean, they ask questions that he doesn't like, and he threatens to revoke their press clearance, right? Which is kind of an extreme sort of thing. And he
Did you see that bit though with Acosta? I mean, I would have pulled his press pass probably 2 years ago. The guy's a complete dick. Just a little
yeah, I mean,
baby screaming like, give me the candy, I want my candy. And there's 35 other reporters in the room that were like, but I like candy. I'd like some too. I'm going to have all the candy and you can't have any candy. It's all for me. I'm Jim freaking Acosta. I'm not sharing. And that's all I saw. It kind of reminded me of Question Period in Canada.
yeah.
But bunch of children.
Anyway, I mean, it's like, yeah. I mean, it's a little bit depressing to watch some of the stuff that goes on in, like, what was that? I don't know if you saw it with Trudeau, where they were asking him about that play set that he had got for his kids on the government budget, and it was like 17 grand or something.
17 grand for a play set?
Yeah, like, a little slide and stuff, for his kids to play on. Yeah. And so the head of the opposition or somebody was asking, they're like, so, like, can I just ask, like, what do you get in a $17,000 playset? Like, I've got this one here for $900. It looks pretty good. Like, what do you get? Like, I gotta know. And I mean, to me, I've written a bunch about this on Facebook. The single most important issue nobody is talking about, and it's the subject of accountability and how we make decisions in government. I think that the problem is not so many of these different issues that get raised. I think those are more or less irrelevant. They will take care of themselves if we address this thing about, hey, accountability for results and how we make decisions. I think that is like an enormous disaster.
Well, there's definitely no accountability.
And I hear
the ethics commissioner said that he was that Trudeau was flat out guilty of ethics violations. Okay, so he's guilty. What are the consequences? Zero.
Yeah.
So you're guilty, but that doesn't matter. Oh well, you're guilty. Move on. And so there's no punishment. There's no consequence. So what's stopping them from doing it again? It's hardly a rule. If when you break them, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And, I mean, it should go both ways. Like, I think, I don't really believe in a society where you just live in fear either. I think there should be rewards for doing a great job. Like, people complain about lobbying and, all this cronyism and stuff. It's like, well, of course, it's not a great thing to go and become a politician. I mean, you have to basically give up your job to run on a slim chance that you're going to get in. When you do get in, you're in for 4 or 8 years or something. Then what are you going to do afterwards? It's not exactly a fantastic career move. You didn't get an amazing income. I mean, some people might say, okay, you're getting your salary, your pension of 100 and whatever grand, but it's not like for somebody who's ambitious and hardworking, et cetera, who could go in the private sector and do very well, it's not particularly well rewarded. And so I would say do reverse bribery, basically. Instead of letting the people get lobbied and go to a cushy job at Goldman Sachs, say, hey, look, if you do a great job for our country, then you're going to get paid more than you would get going for the cushy job at Goldman Sachs. And, have the incentive there. Because frankly, if somebody's going to save the taxpayers $1 billion a year, I'm quite happy for them to make a few million. Like, I see no problems with this. And for some reason, there's a bunch of people who seem to think that it would be a horrible thing that politicians could get rich as politicians. It's like, why? If they're doing a good job for you, what's the problem with paying people for delivering value?
Well, don't you think, though, that politics attracts the worst of us for the most part? Because
yeah, but I think the reason for that is because of the way that it's set up.
Pardon?
I think the reason for that is because of the way that it's set up right now. Like, I think, look, the people who I would most like to see in there typically don't want to go there because of what it is. And the people who, want to kind of suck off the tit and do all this kind of thing, exploit the country, et cetera, are attracted there. And, people who wanted to spend a lot of time positioning and jostling and things like that, I don't know, to me, the whole process is wrong. And I talk to people about this. I'll be like, hey, look, I think our democracy is broken. It doesn't work. It's outdated. It's not a very, and they'll be, well, they use the classic Churchill line, which is, hey, democracy is the worst form of government, but it's the best one we've got, or something like that. And it's like, okay, it doesn't matter that. It matters, can we make it better? And I think clearly we can make it better. How can you look at the data and tell me there isn't room for improvement? There's massive room for improvement. And we made a system that was built, for years ago, that made sense years ago. And if you look at, like, as an example, the Electoral College and representative democracy, things like this, it made sense because how were you going to, 100 years ago, have people vote directly on issues when it takes a month to cross the country or something like that? It didn't make sense. But today, I have a smartphone and I can have biometric ID and I can vote on any issue in a second, and we can be done. And it can cost close to $0 to throw that out to the general public. And we can go and we can evaluate, we can evaluate and see real-time data of what people are actually doing to educate themselves on the issues, and on and on and on.
Isn't it
And we don't have
bizarre
a system that takes advantage of it.
that we have no problem doing internet banking, and yet we're still not doing internet voting?
Yeah, it's retarded. Yeah,
I
makes no sense. And
I guess the question there is it's just a perception thing, because I'm scared of internet voting too, because how could you have any checks and balances? If it is hacked, how would I ever know? I wouldn't.
And I mean, so maybe that's a place for things like cryptocurrency, right? When you have decentralized blockchain technology where, it's a decentralized system. So the whole thing keeps itself in check.
Well, there'd have to be somebody watching the hen house, that's for sure. Don't know how to do it though. When you and
I think that the solution usually, I think the solution to that usually is total transparency. So basically everybody is watching it. Like, why is it that I can't easily go to a website and see every single expense that the government makes? I think I should be able to do that. I'm a taxpayer, I'm a part of this country. I'm, a citizen. I can vote, all this sorts of things. Why shouldn't they have to put in front of me every single expense they have? And if I want to, I can comb through it forever. Every expense is made electronically. It's all easily trackable. I can see, hey, you overpaid for your toilet seats. Hey, what are you doing? And I can call you out and question you on any of that. I think the very first basic step for a lot of that would be that kind of transparency. And if you have that transparency, then you start to put in other things around it, right? Like you say, okay, let's have a system that if somebody has a way they can do it better, then you have to go with the way that's better. If somebody's selling you toilet paper for $10 a roll and somebody can sell it to you for 10 cents, then
the cynic in me,
you're required to go with the cheaper one.
The cynic in me says that will never happen, because politics does attract the worst of us. It's generally people that don't want to be a lawyer anymore. So they go into politics, and they go into politics for the same reason that they wanted to be a lawyer. They don't want to work that hard, which you have to work. You bust ass to be a successful lawyer. Then you realize, Jesus, this is a long hours. I don't want to do that. So I want to do something that's not as hard. And yet I still get to argue. And it's the people that it seems to attract are just people that don't have a gregarious or altruistic urge to serve their community and to serve their country. It's not it at all. It's more of a narcissistic urge to be in power. And that the system is set up for that. When you, whether it's the legislature buildings or the parliament buildings, you walk in there, it's a palace. Well, who lives in a palace? The king. And that's how it's set up, so that the common man walks in there and feels insignificant. That's why they are these great, big, glorious, unbelievable palaces, when it should be exactly the opposite. It should be look a lot more like a warehouse, be as stripped down and humble as possible. It's the politicians that should be in the dingy, dusty cubicles, not the other way around, but it's part of the psychology of it, so that when you walk into the hollowed halls, you feel small and insignificant. And when you meet the person who's actually supposed to be your servant, it feels like they are your deity. And that's addictive as hell. They come in
Mhm.
there. It's like, Jesus, everywhere I go, it's red carpet treatment, and I'm in the VIP room, and people are pomp and ceremony everywhere I go. I'm a goddamn rock star. Right on. And that only has one way to go. I want more. People never go, oh, that's too much of the red carpet treatment. They want more, more, and more, and more. And even if you started out in politics well and well
Mhm.
intentioned, it's extremely attractive. It's seductive is the word I was looking for. And come to the dark side. We have cookies.
so, so what do you think can be done about that?
uh, Board up the parliament buildings and literally use a warehouse or something like that. Like start there. Get rid of and the transparency. Like you're saying, we have the technology now. There should be an ongoing real-time spreadsheet of everything that's going on financially.
Mhm.
Money coming in and money coming out. Way more open doors, and it should be easier to run. Canada's a lot better than the States. If you want to be a prime minister, like you don't have to be a multi-millionaire or backed by billionaires to run for office in this country, which I think is great. That's one of the
Yeah.
most horrific parts of the U.S. system, is that if you don't have hundreds of millions of dollars backing you, there's no way in hell that you have a shot, and that's not right. Because right
Mhm.
now it's a popularity contest more than it is anything else, and that's not a
Mhm.
great way to choose a leader because of somebody's
Mhm.
hair or their teeth. That's why
Mhm.
Preston Manning never really had a shot. He's kind of a dweeby looking fella with a squeaky voice. It's like, well, you're not getting in. I don't care what your
Mhm.
ideas are. So to take away the pious part and to provide humility and then to pay them better so that better people are encouraged, and always make sure that there's a path to office that makes sense, that's accessible to the common man, because that's how it's supposed to be. The garbage truck driver might be the wisest, most politically savvy person going, but he's never uh, lived up to his potential. So there should be a path for everybody
Mhm.
to go down that road. So if they want to, and the more transparent it is, the more good people, because the general idea is, ick, what a cesspool. I don't want to sell used cars, and I don't want to go into politics. Um, these are things that I don't want to do because it's full of yucky people, and I don't want to swim in the swamp water. Um, so if we change that and it's all through transparency and accountability, like you're saying, sunlight's the best disinfectant. We have to drain our own swamp because it's still pretty swampy,
Mhm.
and we got to
Yeah.
deal with that. And then with
Mhm.
that, better people will be interested out of a sense of service instead of a sense of power accumulation. That's my 2 bits.
What do you think about the idea of moving to a more merit-oriented system?
How would that look?
So, two examples of how that might be. So, well, like, for example, you're talking about, people walking around and being praised and all this. And I mean, I don't necessarily think that it's necessarily healthy to eliminate that, because we have a human need for significance, right? The truth is, hey, look, it motivates people, and, people are going to find their ways to get significant. But I would rather they're getting significant because they're doing a good job than because of their, right? So take the focus away from, hey, you're the prime minister, you're the member of parliament, you're the MLA, you're the whatever, and instead focused on, hey, look at how well this person's doing at running this department, this area, this whatever. The results speak for themselves. And in that case, yeah, like, good on you, you're a rock star, you're a political rock star. Fantastic. I like that. So that would be one of the first things. And the challenge, I think, with that, of course, is, okay, how do you, like, what are the metrics, right? Because we have to realize that a lot of the metrics are lagging indicators. you go into the next term and it's really a carryover from the previous person's term. A lot of the things you don't have direct control over. You could be impacting a bunch of policies and you don't see the effect of those policies for a reasonable period of time, and there's kind of you're off course apparently, but you're according to plan and things like that. So there's that challenge. And the other thing that I think is interesting is the idea of making who you elect, if you should be electing people at all. That's, I guess, a whole other conversation, but assume that you should, based more like a job interview than like a popularity contest. So, for example, I have a pretty deep concern. I actually think that Justin Trudeau is probably fairly well-intentioned. I might be mistaken about that. I don't know the guy personally, but I've seen some things that indicate that I don't think he's a bad guy. But I do think that he's quite ignorant about how a lot of things work. And that's kind of my main judgment against him. Like, if I was to see him, I would say, hey, look, I think that the problem, or my judgment of you, is that you just don't understand how some of these systems work. And to me, that's, we were talking about civility, and we'd had that conversation. There was that conversation thread that you and I were involved in a little while ago.
We will have to circle around back to that. I got to give you the blowback of what happened there.
Cool. Well, one of the things that I think is interesting when we get into these sorts of conversations is the conversations become shouting matches of people's opinions, as opposed to conversations about, hey, how does this work? Rather than you telling me your opinion about what you think is right and me telling you mine, like, let's explore how this system works, because we live in a series of interconnected systems. And so, it might be all well and good that, you think, as an example, okay, let's look at a field that I'm connected to, is taxation, right? So a bunch of people, it's quite popular today. There's kind of an anti-business, anti-people having money sentiment. And so it's like, tax the rich. This is the thing. And it's like, okay, do you understand the consequences of that? Like, do you understand what happens within the system when you do that? And when you change that, when you shift the conversation of, hey, should you tax rich people or not? And instead focus on, hey, look, how does this system work? When we do this, what is the consequences of it? What happens? Because I assure you, it's not just that you suddenly magically take more money out of the pocket of people who have money and move it to people who are less fortunate, and this is all well and good. You do things like crush the incentives. You do things like causing people to want to move abroad. You do things like, causing people to move their businesses and their jobs and things like this abroad. And, there's a balance point there for sure. It's not totally about, hey, look, you should have no tax or anything like that. But just understand, what are these consequences? And based on those consequences, how do we find like the optimal blend? We're looking for that, balance point within the intersecting curves.
I struggle with, like, if I was to do a questionnaire, a psychometric questionnaire on what my political leanings were, it probably comes out quite left on a lot of topics. Socialized medicine.
Yep.
It's probably the one part where there's not really any room for conversation with me. I will never be agreeing with the Republican line of, it's a good that you should pay for. Although I understand the rationale, it's a morality thing with me. It's just a sense of right and wrong. I'm alive. My children are alive, all because of our public health system. I'd be dead without it. And so would my oldest boy this summer. He'd be dead. And our system in Canada, of course, is not perfect. There's no such thing as perfect, but it works. It works really well, and I'm happy with it. I do believe, though, that our public health system should be two-tier. Like, if you got the dough, you should be able to pay for that service if you want to pay for that service, which we already do to a point. You can pay for an MRI, you pay for the dentist. So to a point, we do have a two-tier system, but that should be opened up so that people that want to skip the line can skip the line if you got the dough to do it, and that's fine. But socialized medicine, I'm always going to be there. At the same time, I'm a free market capitalist. Free market capitalism is the closest that we can get to having a system where you can be somewhat free, because we do live in an economic prison. our very system is a prison. And the only way to get day passes is to have some dough. And passive incomes of dough, if you really want to be passive or semi-passive. The more passive your income, the more free you actually are. If you're still trading time for money, you're not free. You're a slave. You're an economic slave, and even if you don't admit it, you still feel it. People feel that trapped and that pointlessness of existing within our system. Jesus, I'm on a rant. Where were we going? What was the point? What were we just talking about? I just lost it.
But you were talking about where you sit on the spectrum, and I just previously been talking about this idea, understanding how this.
Right. So my struggle is, even though I'm a free market capitalist, I do have some definite left leanings. And what do you think of capped capitalism? I've never heard of anybody else talking about it, but it's an idea I have in my head that the idea of billionaire is gross. It's grotesque. And it's, as far as satisfaction of life, it's law of diminishing returns. It's not economies of scale. Like at a certain income point, your life doesn't get better and better and better and better and better and better. And I don't know where that line is. I was thinking maybe a personal net worth of 500 million would be a good cap. And anything beyond that, the profits go back to the employees. I don't know what the right cap is for, and for annual income. I don't know, 3-4 million a year, maybe as a cap for personal income. And then the rest goes back to society somehow, whether it be taxation or directly back to the employees, which is an extremely socialist kind of viewpoint. But wherever that number is, I don't know. So I definitely have the struggle between those two. I believe that being a billionaire is grotesque. It's just too much. It's gluttony. And
I mean, I really make a distinction. I heard a talk Bill Gates gave where he was answering some questions, and I thought it was a really valuable insight. And he talked about the difference between net worth and consumption. And so I think there's a big difference between, hey, $1 billion of personal consumption versus $1 billion of net worth. And quite often, I'm really glad that the people who have, a few $1 billion have it, because I think they use their money very well. I could take a look at, hey, look, Jeff Bezos is doing some cool stuff that probably wouldn't otherwise happen. Elon Musk has done some pretty cool stuff that probably otherwise wouldn't happen. And I think the basic law of management is take resources from where they're less efficiently used and move them to where they're more efficiently reused. And so, in a sense, redistribution of wealth from wealthy people who have obviously done something right in terms of how they manage their money and giving it to people who don't have is a poor management decision. It's like, okay, what are those people then going to go do with it? I'm not saying that.
What if it goes back to wages?
Oversimplification.
Like Jeff Bezos as an example, right? World's richest man. So an extreme example. What if his income was capped at, let's say Jeff makes $20 million a year personal income. Let's make it 50 so that he's even above most, like the most elite of pro athletes. So $50 million a year personal income, 500 million personal net worth. And everything that goes over top or beyond that trickles back to his staff in the form of wages and bonuses. Wouldn't that be great for the economy? Because now they have more dispensable income.
I mean, I think you would get more consumer spending, but would they spend that money in a way that's more effective? I think that's kind of the part of the real question. I mean, I don't think that wealth sitting is not a good thing, right? Wealth sitting is a negative. However, and this is, I think one of the strongest arguments against taxation, and I think actually one of the most positive trends within modern society is philanthropy. And, Bill Gates might argue, hey, look, I don't want to pay tax because I think I can do better with my money than the government can. And I'm like, you know what? Government has a pretty poor track record. I kind of think you're probably right.
Yeah, I would
Like,
agree.
you know, yeah. And I don't know that individual employees on average are necessarily going to do that amazing a job. And I would also wonder about how does it undermine the incentives of people who are going to do a really good job. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. This idea of capped capitalism. I think about it uh, more in the sense of doing things to encourage philanthropy and kind of cycling it that way, which I think we've seen a really positive trend of, right? You have the Giving Pledge, where there's quite a lot of people who have signed up to give away half to 99% of their net worth
Well, maybe with the
before they die.
maybe the cap capitalism idea, whatever that number is, whatever that cap is, which should be just about
Yeah,
impossible to get everybody to agree to. But
yeah,
let's say the cap is 50 million income, 500 million net worth. Everything above that, the person who's earning it gets to choose where it goes. It's still the cap, but they can manage those and say, okay, this is going to go
yeah,
to back to society, and I'm going to decide how it's going to go back to society. I'd be cool with that.
yeah. And I think that's an interesting idea. There is another perspective of it, which is kind of the perspective that I often bring that I think a lot of people don't have, which is the international perspective. Because, okay, let's say that I'm Jeff Bezos and you tell me, hey, my net worth is capped at 500 million. Well, his net worth this year hit over 1.5 or 150 billion, right?
Jesus Christ.
So yeah, it's insane, right? So you think, well, what's going to happen? There's going to be another country that's going to say, you know what? Either we're not going to have a cap or we're going to put your cap way higher. And what's going to happen
And
then?
then he's going to move
People,
to that country. Yeah.
exactly.
I
And
guess it's
now you,
an idealistic notion, but not a practical one.
yeah, yeah. Or it would, in order to make it work, you'd have to have like consensus across the world about what that was,
Then you'd have to
right?
be a
And then
globalist. Dun
there you
dun
go.
dun! Globalists. The globalists are coming to get you.
I mean, look, there's some strong arguments in favor of globalization, right? It's not, I mean, well, look, we live in a global world, regardless of what's going on. And I don't think it's good that somebody can, as an example, run and hide from the law just by crossing a border. I don't think it's good that, Roman Polanski went to France and hid out after he did whatever he did and stuff like that. So, there's something to be said for these, but then there's also something to be said for, hey, look, let's not destroy the autonomy of
We're
these.
getting a lot of background noise from your end. Just to throw it at you.
Let me see if I can close this door. Just hang on a second.
Okay.
All right. Let's see if that's any better. Is that any better?
Perfect. I don't hear a thing.
Excellent. I'm not sure if that's because what I did worked or if somebody died, and yeah. So like, I think it's a super interesting conversation, and I think we should be doing something about it. I don't think that we're. And what I see a lot of though is that people spend a lot of time talking, and I think they sedate themselves by the fact that they can sit on social media and discuss and throw out their opinions. But it's like, okay, but what can we do today to actually make a difference? And what is the high impact activity we can have? And this is where I argue against voting, actually, is that I don't think voting is a high impact activity. You don't get a lot of leverage to make change that way. So, are there some things that we can do? Lobbying, I think, is more effective than voting, generally speaking. You can vote with your dollars. I think that's a great thing that you can do on a small scale. I think if you can create initiatives, and one of the things that I really appreciated, I think, was it this year that Berkshire Hathaway, Amazon, and JP Morgan Chase decided to start their own private health initiative in the US. And I think that's probably the thing that has the single greatest chance of fixing the healthcare system down there. What is it? They're like saying, hey, look, nobody else is going to solve this. It's too hard to solve it through government. So we're just going to build our own solution. And, great. Like, you're doing something to actually make some sort of a positive change. And whether you succeed or fail is not really important. The important thing, and this is what's so great about the market system, is if enough people do it, somebody's going to come up with something that works, and that which works will, in the aggregate, tend to grow and replace that which does not. Amazing.
getting everybody on the same page is definitely the challenge. And it seems that whether it's by design or by evolution and just by happenstance, there seems to be forces at work that intentionally divide us. Whether it's
Mm,
intentional or not, I mean, who knows? But it sure seems that way.
mm,
Everything from the media outlets to you name it. And we were mentioning earlier the conversation thread that you and I were on. I'd made a post on
yeah.
Facebook of a video montage of people that were getting either physically assaulted or screamed at in public places because they were wearing the red hat that said MAGA on it, Make America Great Again. And I was,
Yeah.
I don't know, shocked, more saddened by the response on there. When I posted it, it was to have a conversation, and I was wondering, nobody could actually support this, can you? Like, even if you absolutely loathe every molecule that is Trump, the Trump lump, um, even if you absolutely loathe them, you you wouldn't go around attacking people wearing a "Make America Great Again" hat. I mean, that's just crazy. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't
Yeah.
support it. It's got to be just a few fringe people, but is not. Although it's just a few French people that will actually go and scream in your face and drum you out of a restaurant. It's not a fringe idea at all. And there was actually a
Yeah.
significant amount of support saying they deserve it because I
Yeah.
agree with the sentiment. And then
Yeah.
what happened during that conversation thread, both you and I um, were the adults in the room and just talked about. We stayed at the top of the what's this Graham's hierarchy of arguments, and we were just talking about the central point, just the facts. Uh,
Mhm.
sorry, Detective Friday, just the facts, ma'am. And we say we stayed with the central, just to have a conversation, an adult critical thought
Mhm.
conversation. And the end result of that is I lost two friends. And we're talking about somebody I stood for him at his
Wow.
first wedding. Like, I stood for him at his wedding. He stood for me at my
Yeah.
wedding and
Yeah.
instantly ran out and unfriended me on and blocked me on both Facebook and LinkedIn. Well,
Wow.
he didn't block me, but his wife who unfriended, they both unfriended me, and his wife flat out blocked me.
Wow.
and and the bottom line is because I said, um, your opinion is not a fact; it's an opinion, and I didn't do it in an asshole way or a condescending way. Just, oh no, this
Yeah.
assertion, this thing you're asserting, that's an opinion, and I'm happy to let you have it. That's your right to
Yeah.
have this opinion, but it is not a fact. Well, even though she's a lawyer with an MBA,
Yeah.
I think that did more
Yeah.
harm than good. There was no logic there. It's like, that is a fact. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and try to describe the difference between an opinion and a fact to somebody who's highly, highly educated.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and now they're gone. And I, I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, part of me is kind of sad, but
So,
the
so
other,
this is a really interesting topic, and maybe,
no, go ahead.
well, this is an interesting topic to me because it's something that I've experienced personally. I had a conversation with my brother about it recently. I think a lot of people are experiencing it, and maybe we can end on this because we've been talking for a while, and I have to go and take care of some other stuff shortly. But I would have these times where I would, express my viewpoint, challenge somebody on their viewpoint. Often I thought I was being very reasonable, right? Like, I remember one time somebody posted, I don't know what it was, they said something about, hey, look, whoever it is that is in this situation, whoever expresses this viewpoint, yeah, I know that's not, that's a good person that I don't want in my life. And so I didn't actually go along with that viewpoint. I just said, hey, just a thought that, sometimes the people who you disagree with most are the people who most need your love and care and support. And, is it really healthy to isolate those people? And that person blocked me.
Oh
That was
my
how
God.
they dealt with it. Yeah. And I'm like,
For
this is
saying a
not
very Christian kind of thing. That sounds like something Jesus would say.
exactly.
Actually, that is something that Jesus says. I've actually read the New Testament a couple of times, and he actually says exactly that.
There you go. There you go. And so, I would talk to people about this, and there'd be some other cases, and I would, if people would come back negatively at me and block me, I would go to friends and I would say, like, was I out of line? Like, what was going on here? Because, if I was out of line, tell me I was out of line. And usually, unfortunately, they're well-meaning friends. They would come back and they would say, no, that person's psycho, they're crazy, they're ridiculous, whatever. And what I was forced to confront, it's like a core thing in, I think, living well, is it doesn't matter whether they're psycho or whatnot. The question is, was my desired result to have somebody block me? And the answer is no. That was not my desired result. My desired result was, maybe to have them think differently or, whatever, right? And maybe that's not. So the thing is that, great, it doesn't matter that whether the person's out or whatever. It's like, okay, did I achieve my desired result? And because I didn't, it means that I can't control them, so I can only control me. And I have to figure out some different way to communicate to try and, get into there. And I had this same conversation with my brother. He had a similar thing. He posted something that he was kind of making a joke, but he was kind of, making a point as well. And somebody ended up blocking him. And again, it was like, hey, he felt kind of bad about it and like, hey, like, what's going on? I didn't want to end this relationship over a small comment. I just wanted to, raise an alternative viewpoint. And so I think it's really valuable for us to consider today in this I don't want to say it's a nasty social media environment, but it's one where people are really quick to sever relationships, sever communications, cut things off that doesn't
Like,
agree
do
with
it
them.
my way, or I'm going to take my ball and go home.
Exactly.
It's like a
And like,
tantrum.
exactly. And what are the skill sets that you use to try and communicate so that you can actually have civil discourse, so you can actually go someplace reasonable? Because to me, the thought of a world where we eliminate everybody around us who disagrees with us is a scary world. That's like, you are setting yourself up, I cannot tell you the immediate consequences, but like disastrous, I believe, long term.
I just caught the irony of that. This exact same people that are screaming diversity, diversity, diversity or death. They're the exact same people
Yep.
that bubble themselves and refuse to have diversity, refuse to listen to diverse opinions. That just hit me. That is a crazy irony.
There's a great article I read around the time when the Trump election was on. It was written by a sociologist, and it was something like, I can tolerate anything except the outgroup. And they kind of sanitized things down to blue and red. And it's like, hey, if you're blue and you're red, it's like, I can tolerate an extremist on the other side of the world, but I can't tolerate a red in my own social circle, And he just talked about these, like this, you live in this shadow world. Like, he gave the example. He's like, hey, look, apparently there's a huge percentage of people are young earth believers. Okay? They believe that the world is 6,000 years old, 10,000 years old, whatever the number is. He's like, but I don't know any person who believes that. That's weird.
I've met him.
And then people who, but so that's you're in a different circle, right? Your bubble is different, I guess, is kind of and so he was like, there will be these different viewpoints that it's like, supposedly they're really popular viewpoints, but you have no idea that they even exist because you've somehow subconsciously or consciously isolated them out. And I think this was a big problem in the whole Trump election, right? You had all these people who, they were so sure that Trump was going to lose because everybody agrees with them, of course. But that's because they have no communication with another side of people who actually are not happy with how things are. There's an entire huge segment of the population that feels disenfranchised, that feels underserved, that feels, all this stuff. And you don't even know that they have that feeling.
Well, it's crazy that nobody
that's a
noticed that
problem.
entire stadiums were full. again and again, and
Yeah.
he's doing it again. No politician that I can name has ever
Yeah.
repeatedly, again and again, filled stadiums with 10, 15, 20, 30,000 people, some of these
Yeah.
stadiums. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like U2's on tour or something. And he's doing sometimes 2 a day. It's
Oh yeah.
unbelievable. So they see these stadiums that are just full and it's completely discounted.
Yeah.
It's completely discounted. It's trivialized, or more often than not, 100% ignored. Like
Yeah.
it's not happening.
Yeah.
The dishonesty in the media is crazy. It's funny. Larry King was it Larry King? I think it was Larry King, who used to work for CNN for like 20 years
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the longest time seen
The king
as
of talk.
the king of talk. Now he's on
Yeah.
RT, Russian television. And he says, CNN hasn't been a news organization in a very long time. There's no news
Yeah.
there. It's propaganda. And whether it's by design or simply a business decision, uh, who knows? But at the end of the day, it's not news. That's
Yeah.
not it's not just CNN. I don't want to pick on them. MSNBC is the same way. They've made the same business decisions, and yet RT, because it's Russian, is like, oh, it's Russian propaganda. Have you ever watched RT? It's pretty balanced. It's pretty honest
Is
and
it? I
balanced.
haven't watched it.
And you talk to the
I
reporters.
remember watching Al Jazeera, finding it pretty good.
Al Jazeera. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well, and that's an actual town in Spain, right next to Gibraltar, right? Al Jazeera. That's an actual town too. That the network's named
Oh,
after.
I didn't know that.
Have you been to Gibraltar?
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Well,
I have not. I was
I'd put
in
it on the list.
Spain
It's pretty
twice,
cool.
this 3 times. Yeah, it's on the list. I'm definitely going to go check it out. It's unfortunately again, Tiana has to get a visa there, which is quite a pain to get. So, we're like, okay, well, I'll have to go without her, or find when we're doing British visas or something.
Oh, just leave her at the McDonald's on the other side of the airport, because you walk across the airport to get there.
She'll love that.
You walk across
Oh, really? Oh,
the runway, and then poof, you're on Gibraltar.
nice, nice. Well, I definitely want to check it out. It's on the list.
All right. Well, Michael, it's been a couple hours, and we have to do this again, brother.
Absolutely. It was a great conversation, and hopefully we'll find some time in the next while to do it again.
All righty. Well, thanks so much, and thanks for joining me. What time is it there right now? Bulgaria?
I think it's like, let's see here. What is it? I think it's like 8:30 or something.
8:30. All
There's
right.
my phones. Yeah.
Well, have a good night.
8:30. Yeah.
And we'll talk again soon.
Sounds great.
All right. Take care, Michael.
Talk soon. Bye.